Well, that's fantastic, George. Thank you
Oh,
very much.
thanks.
Yeah. So you just said that you actually hadn't watched it all in a
No,
cinema
I
like
haven't.
this before, and it's
Yeah.
actually selected by
Yeah,
Matthew
friend.
Knowles- right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Matthew Knowles. Yeah,
Is he
yeah.
quite a young artist? Is it?
Yes, he is. Yeah, yeah. Well, I thought when the idea of putting out the DVD came up that perhaps I might not be the best judge because time changes things. So I thought perhaps a younger person would see works that were in a different way. So that in a way history has to judge what's good. So there are a couple of works I probably. But I do like them. I mean, I like them. I mean, it just seemed a good idea not to pick it myself, and I'm glad I did that actually because he definitely liked the lo-fi stuff. I think.
And would lo-fi the sort of Schweppes ads?
Yes,
and
those things. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they occupied me in a particular way at that time. This hints to something we were talking about at lunch, but it's quite hard to survive and make work as an artist. So that one of the strategies is just yourself. In a way, some of those film ideas was a way in which someone could take something huge by Hollywood and spoil it by somehow inserting another narrative that completely, if you like, takes it off into a highly subjective, highly eccentric place, which Hollywood never does. And so that both the Rickman piece and the airport disaster one, you get a sense of this odd passenger in that one who's somehow got on the plane. So the idea is to take something that was mainstream and somehow pollute it and bring it down to a very highly individual British artist. So I think that was the sort of strategy behind it. But at the same time, it was to do with money as well. And one, as I said, if you haven't got big budgets, then it becomes how one releases one's imagination and takes what one finds is quite a good strategy.
Yes, if you're talking about polluting it and misusing, in a sense,
Yeah.
misusing technology, perhaps that takes us back to the start with the scratch videos.
Sure.
And maybe you could talk a bit about, because you have a sort of, you're kind of very much known as this sort of pioneering figure of scratch video, and kind of what kind of defines scratch video, and the processes you were using, and maybe also the material you were using.
Well, it was a particular moment. When I went to art school, it was very serious in England. There were a lot of problems going on. I was at St Martin's when the rubbish was piling up in Soho Square, and there were society was full of strong arguments. There was big feminist marches in Soho, Reclaim the Night, quite regularly. I mean, I'm just giving you a picture, but in a way, Britain was falling apart with some rather large kind of struggles going on, and the union, Thatcher was to come along and break up the unions. But at that time when I was at St Martin, it was highly political, but also in the art school itself, it was a much more regimented, much less permissive place than these art schools would be now. In fact, there were only sort of two camps you could be in the art school. So what I'm trying to do is paint a picture, and I think, I wasn't articulating it at the time, but I was a forerunner of the 80s. I mean, my work, I wanted to connect up with popular culture, and so I like the idea of, and VHS recorders were sort of, they weren't really affordable, but they were around. So I like the idea of harvesting things I liked on popular television and returning them and realising potentials in them that their original makers never would have done. Because it seems sad to me that all these things were shown, and then they just go into the dustbin, and they're very rarely repeated. But I wanted to take nature programs and bad television and American B movies, and with music and the idea of mantras, like that Nicky Two-Bit, where you take, like a pop chorus, you take various words and you repeat them. So the beginnings of that were, I think I was, in a sense, in an avant-garde moment. I didn't know it, but the 80s quickly ushered on a much more interesting surface, and people started wearing suits. And in a way, London started to be a bit more like Paris. They had croissants, and you can't believe how rough and ready it was you know, when I was at St Martin's, there was one sandwich bar, and there's just a huge tub of margarine, and just slabbed this thing on, and they had about 3 kinds of sandwiches, and if you didn't like it, that was your lot. And that's why everyone loved McDonald's, because when McDonald's opened, at least it seemed cheerful in there. I know that's quite a strange thing to say, but most of the other things around were really dowdy. So anyway, in the 80s, we eventually caught up a bit. I mean, this is slightly unusual reading, but it is the case, I think, that London caught up with Europe in the 80s. But at the same time, there were all these other things that we had been through. This very damaging sort of guilt-ridden beating people. Everyone was beating themselves up with some kind of problem, and so that the art, I think, had got quite stratified and a bit stale, and so I think a lot of people like me were heading for more clubs and different sorts of ways of making work that seemed, I suppose, lighter in touch, more sort of pleasurable, faster, definitely faster. I think that was a big thing in my early work, that I had got sick to death of going to art galleries and seeing interminable pieces. I'm still a little bit sensitive to that.
So did you sort of consciously seek out different contexts for the work? So you saw yourself as an artist, but putting it into sites like sort of record shops and
different
sort of TV and
those things happened. I mean, there was resistance as well. I think last time I came here, I did actually send some video work to the Tate once. I was told I should do, because they were buying video work. But I got a letter back saying that they didn't think it was art, and nor did they want to buy it. So I wish I'd kept that letter. But in a way, if you start working with appropriated footage from popular culture, then there was a tremendous amount of snobbery. And then the minute you put what sounds like disco music on, you lose another few thousand who still, you know, the way we judge and know art is quite strict in a way.
But maybe not now, because
Not
you go
now,
back to
no,
what's
no.
occurring with the younger generation,
Sure.
and you write on your website about James Richards and Hannah Perry and the relationship between what they're doing and acknowledging your role in Scratch Video.
Sure.
And kind of I guess there's a strong relationship, except there's sort of mining the internet as a sort of post-internet generation, and also with Hannah Perry using sort of rapid beats and music. I wondered if you could say something about what they're doing now, what you think about it in relation to what you were doing, because obviously they're making it. Well, I think they're making it for the art world.
Well, sure they are. It's much more permissive. So there aren't. You could almost do anything. You know, I mentioned that I saw your son skateboarding. I mean, you could have a piece with that. No one would, if you put that on in the tape, no one would say, "Is it art?" You know. So we're in a way we're in a wonderful period where it's incredibly open what one's allowed to do. But the moment I was first working in wasn't like that. But if I wouldn't want to. I mean, Hannah Perry and James Richards. The only thing I would say is that their stuff, they make the image. Actually, they're both different, but I think often James Richards slows it down quite a lot, whereas my stuff is quite zippy. But I think if you do the same things and slow everything down, you get a different effect. You know, perhaps it becomes a little bit more moving, I suppose. Yeah.
And maybe sort of going back to the scratch and the process. Can you actually? Because it's so much about how it's made as well, I think, and so much there is this whole the VHS recording, the U-matic tape, the winding back was the forwarding. Yeah. And this is so different from the process, the way in which they're making work now, and so it does have a different quality because of that.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways in which I'm not sure what I did would have been possible 5 or 6 years earlier, because there suddenly came, the equipment got better, and the Sony Fifth Edit Suite could you could kick a beat and edit, if you like, live, which was a lot quicker, a lot easier to make that stuff. So I mean, it's hard for people to imagine, but things like Absence of Satan were quite shocking to people when they first came out. It really was something quite different. And also, I had a lot of friends who are musos.
Right.
So one of the big differences, I had all the samples and they're all in tune. The whole track is made from sounds into films, but then it's all in tune and the pictures are put back last. So we get it to work as an audio piece first, and then you drop the helicopter. I mean, it's going to work because it works out. Sounds great in the studio, the door shutting and a helicopter. So the way I was doing it was much sound first, and using a big studio meant it was always going to sound a lot better or more plush than perhaps people just working in an edit suite trying to do that kind of thing. And that still remains the case, even though YouTube is full of a lot of appropriated footage. If you notice the sound, it's not quite as big as the stuff I was coming up with. Busily consulting your notes.
Yeah. I was going to move on actually to talk about the. There's a very nice essay about your work by Gareth Evans actually on the Lux website, and sort of puts your work into sort of three the areas. The scratch videos, the monologues, sort of micro dramas, which are completely compelling. The sort of middle section, and then what he describes as real-world physical experiments, like the shouting piece that's in the gallery here, which maybe brings us to here, what's happening here. And I think the sort of monologues and microdramas brings us to the very, very end and the Freestone drone, and the relationship between those pieces and the monologues we saw here. Yeah, well,
as I said, I think I'd always liked writing. I came from, I was always good at writing, and so, everyone's different. I think, what's quite often noticeable about a lot of artists is they're quite bonkers. A lot of artists don't make much sense, but that's their talent in a sense, is to do an act, and in a way like a seer or someone who perhaps intuits the world. But there's a sense in which artists are quite free in their wiring. But I think I am like that actually. But at the same time, I think when it comes to thinking about it and assessing it, I feel I can phrase it or put it in an order. So I tend to have quite loose starting points, but I usually get back to text, and so in a way I try out monologues and things, and it's very much a paper and me kind of thing, and then eventually I start putting pictures to it. But I mean, you asked me a big question, but that would be the links with all of them, perhaps with the exception of the first use of other people's footage. There I was, as I said, I was definitely trying to sort of annoy what was art and somehow cause trouble with that. But sadly for me, actually, the only people who really were excited by it were advertisers and music people, and in a way popular culture itself liked it. But the art world definitely didn't like it.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's also been recycled within the sort of TV culture, hasn't it? A lot.
Yeah.
Some of it.
Sure.
I'd sort of some of it, sort of the weather man. I know it's not quite.
I know,
the
that's
Weatherman.
extraordinary.
That's very like
yeah.
a Chris Morris.
Well, that all came. You don't realise how early.
Yeah. No, exactly. No,
that's. I got an Arts Council grant to work with what was for then a big high-end studio doing early days of CGI, and that actor actually was very good. He improvised that nonsense thing, and then I sort of moved the maps. And they were very pleased with what I did. But they thought I was going to do experiments, but I produced a complete piece. But there was nothing. I mean, again, it was quite prescient because you knew once these machines came out, the weather was going to get a bit more like that, a bit more fancy. In fact, some countries it's even more fancy than that. But I at the time that was, again, it was, there was nothing like it yet. But you're right, it could be on a comedy show now. Yeah.
And maybe that sort of takes us with the CGI to the works in the gallery.
Sure.
And, do you want to talk a little bit about, well, maybe the Cooler Dream and the very, very end and Extra Drones? Expand on that as a series of body of work.
Well, I think you can see the connections with building up a framework, so that I think my art is interpretable. So I think something like the Freestone drone, it has poetic elements, but at the same time it's not as if I'm passing out all the meaning to the viewer. I'm actually creating a few propositions and a couple of ideas and building it up. But I think the CGI is only really in A Cooler Dream, actually. I don't think the others. Freestone Drone is just footage off TV and things. And Shouting Match, again, occupies a very different kind of work. That's, I think, in the end, probably the best contribution to video art comes from Akonchi and Bruce Nauman, all the early Americans, really. Their approach to a sort of performative, free of narrative in a way, but a performative act, usually somewhat dangerous or slightly odd, is really the best way to make video art. So Shouting Match doffs its cap to in a way, the founding makers. But again, because technology moves on and it's slightly more discourse around, in that I place them in different parts of the world with the idea that, in fact, people do shout differently and it means different things, in different parts of the world. Yeah. By the time it gets to New Orleans, it was very hard for anyone in New Orleans to follow any rules, as far as I could tell. They were all mostly smashed. So I'd given up by then. Some of them weren't even shouting. They were just talking. But whereas previously I had stopped and found someone who could fulfil the brief. There, I mean, as an artist, one moves on. And perhaps I'd had enough by the fourth one. I had enough of straight shouting. Anyway.
Well, we sort of bring it back to the very, very end again. Because
you're right. Yes,
I think this is it's a great book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And it's interesting because I was reading something where you were talking in relation to a scratch video saying disrespecting the triangle.
Rectangle, I think.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
That is my typo, because that wouldn't make any sense in relation to the TV. Yeah, that's right. Breaking up the TV with abstract compositional elements and finding ways to place a very kind of hippie, drug-induced machine.
Which is a
yeah, you said that. And this again returns at the very, very end with almost like these sort of John Martin, like this sort of type, sort of apocalyptic end of world imagery.
I think one picks up that there is. I mean, obviously, societies are working, but there is a sort of gloom about from two quarters. There's the sort of environmental gloom that's constantly there. It's hardly one could hardly bear clicking on the Guardian environmental button because there's nothing. There's never any good news. It's all sort of doom and gloom. But on the other hand, we have that feeling that perhaps Western values or Western society somehow lost its way. There's a curious between the environment and a sense of the society that's sort of peddling water or something. I think it's up to others. I'm just suggesting that. So the very, very end, I think, picks up on a sense. I mean, we don't have the Cold War, but we have a feeling that things could suddenly go wrong very suddenly. So I think that affects the creative imagination. So artists pick up that, as indeed do other creative characters.
I mean, it seems very timely with the Freestone Drone right now to be.
Yeah, I didn't.
And a very
that.
serious work, as is the very, very end. I think a very serious work.
Yeah,
although there's still sort of amazing use of modern sort of humour. It's and it's a really the very Freestone Drone. You know, it's an extraordinary way of warfare, though, isn't it? And a way of working with.
Well, the thing again is always to how we can get. From experts or The Economist or the BBC News, you can get a factual account of drones and what they're doing. But that's the job of an artist, is somehow mobilise these elements in ways. I particularly use a poetic form, and that, of course, one reads the world differently. It's the same problem. I mean, nothing I make can help the world, but it perhaps makes people intersect with the problem in a slightly unusual way. So the idea of the drone being a child who's growing up and emerging into conscience and consciousness is quite sad. So I think when the drone's over New York, which is on the building outside, his little speech is about people find me creepy. It's quite good. But as I said, I think art can take big themes, important themes, and its job is to sort of play with the way they fit together and make people think, slightly different, or perhaps irk people in some way. Yeah.
And in the Freestone Drone, there's a very sort of beautiful sort of homage to Chris Marker's La Jetée.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, that I was at the Slade, and I that's right. Yeah, I read it.
A bit later.
And thank you. And I was quite a big Goddard fan, but my tutor always used to say that you should stop watching that stuff, because I was always looking for big. I didn't want simple actions. Well, you've got to remember, everyone around me was sort of, it was light, or it was quite pure, quite sort of, in a way, one proposition, and in that minimal way you stick to it. Whereas I always did want, in that way you could say I was slightly ahead, in that sense that now it's absolutely the norm that one produces work and then there's lots of discourse around it. But I was already heading in that territory, so that's why I liked Marker and Goddard. But my tutor was always telling me, it's wasting your breath with this big stuff. Why don't you just get down to some simple things, achievable things, rather than I was aching for this kind of big movie poetic feel. But I happen to think I've got there, actually, in my later. I might not have been doing it at the Slade, but I eventually got there with things like the Freestone Drone and the very, very end. That they do have, a large feel, I think.
And what about A Cooler Dream, where you're working with narrative? And I suddenly realised there is a relationship with the deep sea, which is kind of ridiculous but fantastic.
Sure, yeah. I did a lot of swimming as a child. Yeah, I think.
Is it the deep sea? Was it called the deep sea?
You mean the film?
Yeah.
The Deep, I think it's just called.
Oh, Passing Ship.
Oh, right, that film. Okay, all right. Okay, yeah, we're drifting a bit here, but no, I think I wanted as well. Because I've mostly done video art, but I noticed that everything's very permissive, and no one has any big vested interest anymore in genres so much. So artists can really do anything. It wouldn't surprise you to go to the Tate to see a sort of bunch of people who normally do this to be working with harpsichordists, or Jeremy Deller, stopped working with bombed out cars from Baghdad and has now moved on to gypsies or something. There's a sense in which artists can just go where they like, which I don't think was the case when I was a student. So I, in turn, as a video artist, I sort of thought, well, why don't... the history of video artists using actors is quite spotty, actually. But in my case, I wanted to weave a story about a Soviet captain who was getting into shamanic drumming and in a way getting into quite hippie territory. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but the idea was to take somebody who was obviously, in a way, doomed, but had his heart in the right place, and he was trying to get the crew to sort of dream themselves out the boat, all against company policy, as it were. But I thought the idea of getting actors, because you see, people get very hung up, or they used to get very hung up about narrative, but the fact is, most of us use language to talk to each other and find out things about each other, and that's why we have that word chat, in a sense that it is just a stream. But that stream is very important, it brings us close and we find out about each other. I think I was reading not so long ago that probably the basis of language was finding out who you could trust. So if you're in a community of around 300 dotted around, Britain, 200 years BC or whatever it might be, you would need language first and foremost to sort of find out where you stood in the world and who you could trust. And that's quite an interesting thing. But to get back to the link to the narrative, in the end, there's no better way in a visual sequence of holding people. It's quite hard for people. For example, if we just showed my early work for an hour, I think that exhausts the muscle in your brain that can take just music and images, if you like. It spoils it in a way. It's quite good if you package up things to vary it. So what I'm trying to get at is that I wanted to make keep making video art. But I thought if I introduced narrative, everything's very free now. No one's going to mind. But it would give me an intense way of getting the viewer to follow a sequence very happily. And I, I watched a lot of programs. So in a way, the antics of the captain keep dry, even though it gets quite psychedelic and very strange things happen. There's nevertheless a narrative thrust to it that I think is quite well paced and acted. So I think people generally like it. Yeah.
So these fantastic psychedelic sequences in both the Killer Tree and the very end. How do you actually make these? Are you making these yourself, or are you working with a post-production company or something?
People, and I hate to say it, but some bits are on the net for free.
Oh no, that's interesting. So you are online on the internet as well.
There's all sorts of bits you could, but I usually I put it through another boxer that were, or do something with it.
So some is appropriated, some you're making yourself.
Yeah,
or some...
yeah. Well, there's a big rave scene, isn't there? So you just tap in rave videos and you can find a few psychedelic bits. But also I've other people contribute bits. I've got a friend who did the submarine stuff. Who's usually I probably involve him on most projects these days because he's very good at that sort of stuff. Yeah. I used to do it all, but I mean, there's all sorts of new techniques now. I'm not keeping up as I should do with all the different software and all the things. Yeah.
Well, maybe you are, in a way you're still, you're still appropriating, and you're sort of exploring, sort of working with new CGI and
that kind of thing. Yeah.
Maybe to go on to a completely different note.
Sure.
Maybe we could talk about the Arts Council.
Oh, hopefully in a positive way. Yeah. Right. What were you going to ask me about? Oh, right.
You've made a couple of films about
that
Arts
piece.
Council.
Well, they wanted that piece. Well, I think it's quite sweet, really. But it's funny that the language they talk hasn't changed, isn't it? A lot of difficult decisions will have to be made. That's just, everyone's always saying that in culture, aren't they? And arts.
Yeah. So they commissioned that. The Arts Council.
Yes, they commissioned it for a party or something, I think.
Yeah.
But being the Arts Council, I don't think anyone bothered to watch it or figure out if it would affect the mood.
and then there's the other Arts Council film, Waiting for Dave.
Oh yeah, well that one wasn't shown, so that's a bit obscure. But yes, well it was a very important. It was probably the only in the sort of 80s, 90s, the Arts Council, the way it was set up was that there was a dedicated moving image committee, and in a way it was a very small community. So they were, maybe as few as 60 people possibly in Britain who were applying to that, maybe more. But if you like, 60 would have been known as filmmakers or video people. So it was a tiny community going to the same committee over and over, and some of them would be on the committee too. But it was all run by Dave Curtis. But I think it was a great shame in some ways. They supported, because they all knew a lot about people, so it was a sort of deep committee in the sense that they knew who was where and what they were doing. Whereas I'm pretty sure today they just read the application and possibly don't really know what the person's other work's like or what they need.
Yeah. Maybe it's a moment to see if anyone's got some questions either about the showreel.
Or the Arts Council, yeah.
Or the Arts Council, yeah. Or George's fantastic showreel.
I've got a very simple question. When you were starting out, where did you show your work if it wasn't recognised by the so-called art establishment?
Well, I was working the original stuff where I was using appropriation. We were taking to Brixton to the Fridge, and we put some screens up there, and we went to places like that. But also there were some people. The ICA used to screen it. That it wasn't as if I was totally excluded or anything. So, and also as the noise picked up about it, I spent a long time promoting it. In fact, it was quite novel. I put these two tapes out called The Greatest Hits of Scratch Video with various makers on, and I used to, if it was very sweet in a way. If people I used to get free advertising. People used to do stories on it, and then it was available mail order. And initially, most of the people who ever ordered it seemed to live in London. I used to cycle round to their house and put it through the box, and it was all very local. But that produced a sort of wave of notoriety, if you like, and people started to know. When I was young, Alan Yemtob decided to meet me, and Peter York, who I'm still friends with. There were a few people, even Robert Plant. I think his daughter was into it, so I ended up meeting Robert Plant in just behind Selfridges, and he's a very tall guy actually, with huge hair. I mean, I think it's all real, but I also there were a few characters. So I think in the art world then thought, well, that they couldn't in a way not show me then because there was a bit head of esteem. If all these other people were interested, they reluctantly in some quarters thought, well, maybe it's okay, yeah.
Would a company like Schweppes have paid you a huge amount of money for the video you did?
What, today? No.
I loved it.
Oh, good. No, they did, yeah. There was no money involved in that. No. No. But yes, I think advertisers quite like artists now reworking their things. It's another. It attests the quality, doesn't it? If an artist's been attracted. So again, that's changed. Douglas Gordon, I think, with Psycho, that was an exceptional thing, really, because normally the lawyers from Hollywood wouldn't let anything happen, but someone must have said it's good for us, or the best decision is to go with it because we'll look terrible if we stop it. I think they must have had one of those discussions. But artists quite often now use famous footage in a way that I wouldn't. That's why I was picking B movies, because I figured no one would notice too much. I wasn't. I know that's got Paul Newman in it, but it wasn't a hit.
Can I ask you a question about where you or how you position yourself as artist in that? Because you saw a real shift during that sort of 30-year period or 25 years from edit MC.
Well, I was young.
To the works in the gallery where there's a full kind of recognition of you as part of a team, but you're the artist with authorship of the work. And there's some films where there's no credit at all.
Well,
I'm just interested in what the kind of. Was there any thinking about that? Did you deliberately remove?
No, I think if I was the only person in it, it didn't really need a credit. I think that was my logic.
You talked about yourself as writer-director in one of them.
Oh right, well that was the thing I did for the BFI, so it seemed sensible to point out, that I'd done those things. But sure, one works from a certain place, and you don't really know where you're going. But I think I've been able to realise, you can see signs of all the things I'm doing now in the past, and I mean it's not a very tidy flow, but there's definitely themes. After I did a lot of scratch work, it was only in '88 I was already working with actors, so I probably. It was in a way more concurrent than it might look. But again, I think we're in a lucky period because art is so loose and categories are not very fixed. And I think some people get very hung up about medium specificity and the precise history of traditions. The argument being that hollowing them out and rendering them as style lessens their status in some ways. So say if you want to make something look like film, avant-garde film, you put speckles on it, and you get a sort of Bollux effect on video, and you can do all this now. But I'm not sure. I mean, I can see what they mean, but the thing is, we're in a different period now, where really the specific nature of the medium, unless you're in front of actual 16mm or 35mm projected in front of you. I mean, most people are watching it on screen, but you might have a different opinion. But in the end, when most people are watching things on laptops and TVs, then in a way that the specific nature of it has disappeared. Yeah.
And maybe that sort of prompts the question of whether you kind of want this also to be viewed on screens, on laptops, on the internet. Do you want it to be more widely accessible?
No, I think there's a big problem with that. The trouble is, if you watch stuff on a laptop, you don't allow art to sort of to work its magic in a way that it's very resistible. When you might as well watch something and then look at your emails and flick back. I mean, everyone does it. There's a sense that you end up. I think if you go to a gallery and you've made that effort to walk there, and there's a video on and it's showing nice and big with a good sound system. I mean, there's no. That's much more immersive, much more moving, affecting. Then I think it's very hard for a piece to really work. I think on a laptop, it seems to make everything merge somehow in my mind.
So do you not put your work online? You don't
Oh yes, I've got things. I'm just sort of talking generally speaking. If you go to a gallery and there's a bit more, in a way, respect for the thing and more time. But it's a complicated argument. I'm not really arguing anything. I mean, clearly a gallery with a big screen is best, but sure, it's better than nothing, the internet, yeah.
Because this is actually a really good context for the screening. It was really wonderful to watch that in a cinema context.
Yeah.
And having actually watched it on my laptop as the screening for, which I did
Yeah.
really enjoy, it
Yeah.
was really good to watch
good,
it in the cinema. And I think there's quite a push towards a question at the minute about a lot of long artist films,
Yeah.
long form artist films being shown in the gallery. And is
Yeah.
that an appropriate context? Because people come
Yeah.
in, they come out of the middle
They
of
don't
it.
know where to start.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I think that is true. I mean, I don't think this is all quite specific to art, but my first coming across video was a skill, a trade. You need to know a lot of things to make it work, and it put people off in a way. Rather like same with film. There's a lot of stuff to know. It's quite easy to come home with a blank negative, etc., or out of focus or terrible sound. But today, I mean, the cameras, I mean, at my worst, it's almost as if having a camera's replaced smoking. If you haven't got anything to do with your hands, you could just get out a camera and start filming things. And it's in some ways, I dislike it because, it's the medium I use. And I think, obviously, video is very special. But it's strange when it's at its worst. I sometimes see it now, it's like installation spice or visual monosodium glutamate. You have a sort of show and you think, yeah, let's project some stuff on it, and it's a bit like, I mean, it's true, people have disco lights because it makes somewhere seem more exciting than it is, and similarly you can see video used in that sort of way. It brings a bit of energy to a place. So I think I'm more I suppose as I'm more invested in it, I think it's quite nice if you have a particular amount and a particular space to see it. Yeah, I think you're likely to enjoy it more. And it goes the same for classical music. I mean, if you go to a concert and people play a piece and no one else is on the phone or running up and down naked or whatever, it's just the concert, then you probably enjoy it more than if you were doing your emails and something like that and they were playing say, in the park. And you could skateboard.
Focus on that thing.
Yeah.
And so you sort of mentioned the sort of everyone having their sort of iPhone. I wondered whether you have an iPhone which you're constantly sort of collecting bits of footage, and you've got that sort of magpie approach still. And obviously it's just so much easier because of that.
Yeah, I don't because as I say, I mean, I think I sort of write things up and then look for the images. You're right. There are occasions when I've something so striking that I get my phone out, but I tend never to find anywhere to put it lately.
You tend to start with the sound and the
I tend to start. Yeah. But I mean, for example, I got on a plane not long ago, and they were firing in some sort of chemicals, I think, to kill insects, and so it was like walking in a cloud. The top of the aircraft was just a cloud. So I film people's heads coming down the aisle in this cloud. But I'll have to dig that out. I have to think of something there to put that to. Very true.
Probably got time for one more question if anyone has a question there.
I saw a common thread in your work was humour. Is that, which I really like in art, is that something you're conscious of, and how important do you think that is for art in general?
Well, I think it's very important, but but I mean, you've only got to know the great novels to see. A lot of them have both tones. Shakespeare definitely has. So it's really, but it is strange in art. Generally speaking, if you're incredibly famous in art, then they think you're funny. But on your way up, it's risky. I think it's risky. It is the case that even an artist like Walid Reid, you know, he had a bad start in a way. People really didn't know what to make of him, but he kept going, and now now he's on the Pantheon, so it's all fine. Maurizio Catalan was similar. You know, he does all these very jokey things, and everyone loves it. But I think if it would have been you know, a student from Cardiff, you know, they wouldn't laugh. It's a curious sort of, but I think in other areas like Hollywood, I mean, all the great films mix the tones. You have to, otherwise it's too relentless. You know, it's the same as conversation. We have a natural rhythm when things are getting. If someone's droning on about the planet for too long, you sort of say, well, shall we have another drink? Or, you know, it moves on. And similarly in art, one has to have a variety of tones. Otherwise, it all gets too monotonous and too predictable. So I don't know. I don't sit down and say I'm going to be funny in this one. I just think it's part of my natural reaction. I also think it's quite satirical most of the time. It's clearly ironic, so it has, you know, it's both funny, but it has a sting. So, you know, humour is classically when people see terrible things. You know, it's not long later they come up with jokes about it. It's the way the body, you know, deals with terrible situations. I was in a lecture the other day, and there was a surgeon there, an army surgeon, and honestly, this person, it just looked like stuff from a butcher's. But he made some quip about all it needed was a bit of wiping and a bit of cleaning. It'd be all serviceable. But obviously, you know, it's black humour. But at the same time, I think it's very necessary in these terrible times. You know, when things are really dark. In the same, and it's quite the case with tragedy and farce. That you know, I remember when my mother died, we all got very tearfully in the hearse. But there was a very young driver in the car. He succeeded in bumping into the coffin, the car carrying the coffin. So, of course, we laughed at that. And he went, "Oh, sorry."
You apologise.
But yeah. Anyway.
So you say you write your narrative first.
Well, if it's a writerly sort of thing, yeah.
But then what I noticed in, especially in Fences Make Senses, which you talked about,
yeah.
and Equilibrium, that you use repetition a lot, and you use it to really.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your process and just how you edit it together and that use of repetition?
Well, often if you have a poignant line and you need it, you know, I don't really make work past, I think 15, 12 minutes is an ideal time for something to, if you like, work its magic. So you want to have, because you're not using big actors and big casts, you need, if you like, a poignant anchor point that will give someone. So in a way, it works like narrative. You've got this thing that comes back. In Fences Make Senses, it's imagine swimming to a place where you're not wanted. So that thought, you know, coming in at 4 or 5 times in that period of time, gives you a kind of respite. Oh yes, I get what we're on about, and that's really, yeah. I mean, one has to have some organising principle. Otherwise, it would be free association in the ballpark, which wouldn't feel as satisfactory.
Does the structure evolve as you're editing?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's once I start working with the images, then I'm constantly changing the voiceovers and things and rewriting it. And it took me a long time to get the Freestone drone quite right. Because you're just looking at footage of Afghanistan and things, you know, thinking, what the hell can I do with this? You know, it's all quite serious stuff. But slowly, you know, I got the drone idea, and then it all makes sense, you know. So But no, I'm very much a visual person, but I think I like to structure things, and I dislike possibly a habit you see quite often today, but there aren't any rules. But a lot of artists perhaps almost turn up and here's my stuff. You make sense of it as you will. I mean, it's possible to go to lots of exhibitions that have that sort of ethos where it's almost up to the viewer to figure out. You're not quite sure. The artist doesn't give much away. It's highly ambiguous, so you're left just on your own.
I'm afraid we're going to have to
Sure. Okay.
finish
Yeah, that's
there.
getting
Can
all right.
I just say thank you so much to you
All
both?
right,
That was a great
Thank you.
presentation. Some good questions as well.
All right, thank you.